I think any artist who is genuinely building and creating and improving upon themselves, whether it's their art, whether it's their knowledge base, whether it's their skill set, no matter what it is, as long as they're seriously, you know, looking into constructive feedback and improving upon whatever it is they want to be, they want to get better at. I think as long as it can survive this market, when things turn around for the better, I think it'll become very clear who actually was doing the building and who was just saying they were.
Welcome back to the NFT Now podcast. I'm Matt Medved, and today's guest is Grant Yoon, a true Renaissance man of Web3, who has emerged as one of the top-selling artists in the NFT space while balancing medical school and breakdancing. His distinctive work has sold at top auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's, and I'm excited to find out just how he manages to wear so many hats at once. Before we jump in, I want to encourage you to sign up for our weekly newsletter at nftnow.com/newsletter. Each week, we distill everything happening in the space into actionable insights straight to your inbox, free of charge. Without any further ado, Grant Yoon. Grant Yoon on the NFT Now podcast. So glad that we could make this happen, man. How's it going?
Dude, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. I know it's been a long time in the works, but there's a lot to dive into. You've been super active, and it's been a pretty interesting year to say the least, right?
Yeah, it's been exciting on my end, but it's also just been exciting just seeing everything that's been going down on, NFT Twitter and all that.
Never a dull day in Web3. Uh, well, man, you have a really interesting backstory. I think we should just start from the top. Tell us a bit about juggling med school and breakdancing and everything that all the different pursuits that you do, and still also making your way into NFTs and having a real breakthrough in crypto art.
Yeah. This might be a little bit of a long segment, but I'll try to keep it short. So, I've been an artist my whole life, and long story short, when I went to college, I wanted to start doing digital illustrations. I picked that up, kind of self-taught from the ground up. Some people know that story of, I started illustrating on PowerPoint basically because I had no other tools. I didn't know of any other tools. I taught myself a lot about artists, and I kind of knew the type of art I wanted to convey. And maybe at the time, I just didn't have the skills or the tools to be able to create the things that I wanted to. But the vision has always been there. And then, over the years, I've just been slowly grinding away at, improving my style and finding a unique voice for myself as an artist. When we begin as artists, it's sometimes difficult to create a style of your own that's unique to yourself. So it took me, several years and a lot of trial and error to get there. But eventually, I got to a point where I was very happy and confident with the style that I create. And then towards the end of 2020, I started hearing about Beeple, about these things called like metaverse lands, like on Decentraland. And I've always been like a pretty big like proponent of crypto just in general. I always believed in Bitcoin and just like decentralized currencies. And so I just looked into it, and there was this application to Super Rare. And so I didn't know what a MetaMask was. I didn't really know, that side of Twitter. I didn't know any of that. But I just, thought I'll put myself out there. That's always what I've been about. And I applied for Super Rare, completely forgot about it. And then in February 2021, I got onboarded and I got accepted. And that's when I minted my first NFT. And so the journey to getting to from there to where I am today, and even like from the very beginning when I started digital illustrations, it's always been about just pushing the boundaries and pushing the limits of what I think I can possibly do with my life. I started applying to medical school. Well, even before medical school, I applied to college, from high school, and I have all these hobbies in high school, and people tell me, you can't do these things in high school once you go to college. And then college comes around and you realize you're better at time management, and you have these passions that you're really focused on. And then, you spend a couple years, doing all these activities you need to do, like volunteering and doing work and research and doing all these board exams to go to medical school. And then once you get into medical school, people say, you can't do, you can't exercise, you can't eat healthy, you can't do all these other hobbies you got because you're going to be, so focused on studying. And then you get to medical school and you realize, like, you have the ability to improve your time management and focus in on the things that you really enjoy. And so I've never let go of the things that I think is are imperative to just living a happy life for myself, which is being an artist and, trying to be as healthy as possible. Of course, that includes, like, exercise, eating right, sleep hygiene, all of that stuff, and mental health as well. And so, it's always just been about, like, pushing the limits of what I know, whether it's time management or whether it's, I find something very difficult to understand in medical school or something very difficult to illustrate or find very difficult conversations on Twitter or Web3, whatever it is, it's always just about trying to, push the boundaries, basically.
Yeah, I love that, and there's a lot to dig into there. I think I'd love to hear a little bit about um, that moment where you felt like you really kind of broke through in terms of the art that you were putting out and the NFTs that you were selling. Like take us back to that moment.
Yeah. So when I first got onto Super Rare, this is February 2021. I didn't know what a MetaMask was the day I got onboarded, right? I didn't know people use Twitter. They told me I had to have they didn't tell me I had to have a Twitter, but they asked me what my Twitter was. So I just assumed, like, oh, it's probably something that I should have. Created a Twitter, had zero Twitter followers, right? So at the very beginning, I had almost nothing, like no followers. No one knew me, right? I was just this random digital artist trying to come up. And for the first few months were pretty sporadic. There were just kind of different styles, different things that I've illustrated over the years. And I was selling them for anywhere between zero point 0.5 to like 1 ETH, pretty slowly. And I just was like, oh, okay, cool. Maybe, like, oh yeah, I have this in my back pocket I could create. So, or that I've created in the past couple years. Maybe I'll just mint this, et cetera, et cetera. So, when you go back to kind of my older mints, it's a lot of, like, styles that don't seem very cohesive. And then there's been a couple moments throughout the journey where I've really, like, honed in on what exactly it is I want to do as an artist in this space. And one of those moments was when someone reached out to me from Super Rare. Um, and he said that, or they said that there's a lot of people who are looking into my work, but since I have a lot of these different styles, they just don't know what they're gonna get next time I mint something. And so, he wasn't telling me I need to do anything, but he was like, "Oh, this is something that I've heard in the streets." And so I f the moment he said that, I knew exactly that I had to hone in on one particular style, and that was a style that I felt most connected to, which is, the style that most people know me for today, and the style that I really spent, several years trying to craft and perfect and, find my own unique voice in. And so that was one thing. And ever since then, it's always been that style and that style only. Even then, the mints were slowly coming in and selling slowly. And there were a few months in June, July, August where I basically had no sales. And then one day I woke up, and a few collectors had purchased, my one of ones. Like, they just swept my one of ones completely. And one of them was Tappy, and I haven't talked to him in a little bit, but I used to talk to him quite often. He's a crypto punk on Twitter, and he was telling me that, he really enjoyed the vision that I had for my art. And I think from that moment on, I realized that it was really important to engage with people on Twitter because this was the first big collector that I was talking to, and I was looking at how he was interacting with, artists and collectors and enthusiasts on Twitter. And, I asked him a lot of tips, right? Like, I didn't know anything about Twitter. So I was just like, hey, what's the best way to get engagement? What are some things I can do as an artist? What are some things that you do as a collector that gets traction? And so I think through all of that, it's just been like asking questions about what to do and what I'm doing wrong, learning from people's critiques. And so there's no real like one moment, but there's been several things along, kind of the journey. And then I'd say towards the end of 2021, that's when Starry Night came in with Vincent,
Mhm.
and he put an all-time high in for me. That was, I think, like almost 2x whatever I had prior. And so it's just all of these like little victories, I would say, that I've had that kind of have amounted to what I have today.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. It's been amazing to watch the journey. I'm curious, you do have a quite a distinctive style, and I know that you've cited some influences like Grant Wood and Ed Ruska. Like, how would you describe your style? Where do you draw that inspiration from?
So I think I've talked quite extensively just about the artists that inspire me, and you've mentioned a couple. Of course, I also have some other artists, like a lot of 1900s painters, and more recently, actually, the Impressionists have been inspiring me as well. But besides kind of the artists that inspire me, which you can look up in other articles I've talked about, but things I just don't talk about too often is really just following my vision. And that seems so cliche and so ambiguous, but what I mean by that is when I start an illustration, unless it's a commission, right, where the person hiring me wants a specific illustration, if it's something for myself, I just start with a concept, a very ambiguous concept, and I just go at it. And then it has no end goal to it. There's nothing I want to put in it. The only thing that I want to make sure is that it's subtle enough that people can relate to it from their own personal lives. So I that's about it. And when I illustrate, it's just, are the vibes right? And if the vibes are not right, then I need to go back at it, or stop it. I found this sweet spot at this point where I'm able to create illustrations that are illustrations that I want to showcase, but at the same time are ambiguous enough, like I mentioned, where other people can look at it and think, oh, this is, something from my life or something from my past, or where I live, or a particular memory that I've had that I can relate to. And that's really like what my art is about. It's really about just connecting emotionally with just other people.
Yeah, absolutely. A moment that stands out, I think, in your career, when I think back upon as I started to gain familiarity, understanding of your work, was the release of Cow and the CCO element of it, which I think kind of had a really interesting resonance around the space, and obviously kind of created a little bit of like a meme meta, which as a creator, is I think is exciting to see because it means like your work is touching people and they're like, kind of putting their own take on it. I'd love to hear like what that was like through your own eyes as well.
So I work in a lot of different series, right? And the first series I ever created was called Midwest,
Mhm.
which was kind of my depiction of the Midwest, basically, here in Wisconsin when I first moved, since I'm originally from San Jose, California. And Cal was one of the last mints that I had from that series. And the reason didn't mint it for so long was because I was scared of what people would think about it. I mean, it is quite literally just one solid color and then like a cow on it, right? And so I just wasn't sure if people would appreciate that illustration. But then one day, I was talking to Defiance, and he really wanted the piece, and so we organized a deal, and he bought it for, I can't remember exactly how much it went for, but it went for 5 figures on Super Rare. And I think the the meme component of that is, it's I personally like the illustration. I think it is a good illustration, but also it's just funny to think like this solid color of green with a cow on it went for this amount of money, and some people might think that that's kind of absurd. Other people might, like the illustration, and most people probably think of it, somewhere in between, right? Kind of a mixed picture. It was one of the highlights of my NFT experience so far, because just so many artists that inspire me in crypto Twitter, created their own rendition of it. I think I immediately made it CC0 because, I didn't want to, gate it to anyone or anything. Like, most of my art really is just to reach as many people as possible. And if people are creating kind of their own interpretations of it in a funny and ironic or in a serious manner, whatever the reason, whatever the reason is, I think people sharing that art, and sharing their own interpretation of that art is really important. And really just like was a fun, exciting time for me, really.
Yeah. Well, one thing that always noted in your kind of your career arc for you is you have a great collector base. You mentioned a few of them like Tappy, Vincent Van Gogh, and many more. And that doesn't happen necessarily overnight. It doesn't necessarily happen. It could be an area that a lot of artists in the space are always looking to make inroads in or better understand and the like. I'm curious, like what factors do you think played into building that collector base, and also like you mentioned, the exchange with Tappy kind of opened your eyes to this connection that can exist between artists and collectors in the Web3 space and the NFT space that doesn't necessarily exist in the traditional art space. So curious to hear your thoughts there too.
Yeah, I think building a strong collector base it's a difficult task. I think some artists have it easier than others. Like for example, Tyler Hobbs, obviously, and Dimitri. If the art is exceptional to the point where there is no doubt that that is going to be something valuable in the future, or maybe even valuable at that time, I think it's very easy to build a collector base. And it's not up to me to decide who has good art and who doesn't. If anything, it's kind of the market that dictates that. But as you can tell, some of the art blocks projects that are really high up there, have a very strong collector base for good reason. Um, for myself in particular, part of the reason I have a strong collector base is because a lot of the collectors that collect my art actually enjoy looking at the pieces that they own from me. This particular illustration reminds them of, where they grew up or where they were born or, where they met their partner or where they had their first kid or where they went to school, where they work now. And so there's a very deep emotional connection to a lot of these collectors, I think, with the illustrations that I have. And then another thing is just like me being so active on Twitter. I've learned that on Twitter, it's important to just bite your tongue sometimes if you're heavily opinionated on something. Typically, those things that you're highly opinionated on kind of work themselves out anyways, and you don't need to be caught up in the fire while it's going on. And so it's being kind of self aware of your own art style, but also being self aware of your internet presence on Twitter. For myself in particular, I remember, like, for example, when I first met Vincent Van Gogh on the internet, on Twitter, I think it was because I created this random Pepe. And this was like before I knew what fake rares were. This is before I knew like I knew like of like the Nakamoto card and stuff, but I didn't know the Pepe community was so strong. And this was 2021, and I created just this like random Pepe illustration. And then VVD, I think, commented on it and then followed me that day after he saw that. And then after that, like another collector reached out to me and said, "Hey, I can onboard you to these things called fake rares." And then, that kind of opened the doors to another collector base where I met a lot of collectors through fake rares and a lot of artists through fake rares. And I've helped onboard a lot of artists as well onto that platform. Um, and so one door opens another as long as you're receptive and you're willing to just, hear people out and kind of be self-aware, and also aware of the status quo and, the memes that are going on Twitter, the kind of macro and micro things that are happening in the world. I think, you know, the more educated you are, and the more you're able to create your own personal opinions about things, I think really has people look at you as someone who, um, I don't know, just as someone who is, like able to create like opinions for themselves and has, a kind of like a strong trajectory of where their art where their vision for their art is going.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and if there's anything we've seen over the past couple of months, it's the power of memes. I'm curious, like thinking about that, it seems like you've been really like in touch with internet culture and also like the memes that kind of drive the space as well. As you mentioned, contributing to fake rares. You also contributed a card to the memes by 6529. This is the memes of production. I'm curious, like as an artist and a creator in the space who's creating in this kind of like marketplace in this climate that does feature, for example, a lot of pseudonymous collectors, that does is driven a lot by mimetic expression. Like, how do you think about the power of memes as an artist?
Memes are probably one of the most powerful tools for an artist because there's just so much culture so fast behind memes, but it's almost a double-edged sword where some memes just don't stand the test of time. Actually, most memes probably don't stand the test of time. And so it really comes down to understanding if the meme that you're helping is going to be culturally relevant in the future. And, maybe Pepe's aren't going to be very important 10, 20, 30 years from now. But I think they've made a significant impact on internet culture even before, crypto. I think there is merit to contributing to that community because that community is so robust. And there's just such a rich historical like lore behind Pepe's since the beginning, since the creation of the character. I think that is like a meme that I can get behind. But there's a lot of memes out there that I don't necessarily take part in. And you don't see me actively taking part in because as funny as they might be and as hyped up as they might be for the time, who knows if they'll be relevant in a week or in a month.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that is obviously characteristic of the NFT space and crypto space in general is obviously the volatility, right? Like there's the bulls and the bears, the market cycles. I think for many artists in the NFT space, this is like this kind of a bear market is a more of a new experience for many of them. Like I'm curious, like from your own experience, like having experienced the euphoria and the rise of and the excitement of the bull, and now being in this bear market, like what has that been like to navigate as an artist, and what have been kind of the challenges or the opportunities there?
I mean, I know that it's also like in part of me like being kind of aware of the situation that we're in as a space, but there's also luck mixed in for sure. I haven't been hit as hard. I think I'm doing fairly well in the space, all things considered. But the space is difficult right now, and I think just a lot of artists who can build. And I know we talk about building like it's almost a meme at this point. Like you just say you're building, and then like I don't even know what it means at some points. But like I think any artist who is genuinely building and creating and improving upon themselves, whether it's their art, whether it's their knowledge base, whether it's their skill set, no matter what it is, as long as they're seriously, you know, looking into constructive feedback and improving upon whatever it is they want to be, they want to get better at. I think as long as they can survive this market, when things turn around for the better, I think it'll become very clear who actually was doing the building and who was just saying they were and weren't doing anything. And I also think that those who are here in the space now and who haven't left, despite maybe they haven't had a sale, maybe despite the fact that their bags are kind of, significantly down from what they were last year, I think those people will probably be more rewarded because not only, of, the bags that they're holding or the art that they're putting out, but because of the knowledge base that they've acquired during this market. And the things that, maybe other people are going to miss out on that are going on right now. I think there's some unique things and exciting things that are happening in 2023, despite the condition of the market. People who aren't here are just going to miss out. And that's about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I know we touched on this, but I'd love to dive in a little bit on like the time management because, first off, I come from a medical family. My dad's a neurologist. My mom is a nurse and genetic counselor. Grandfather's a cardiologist. So I know how intensive medical school can be. I know that that is no small feat, right? And, I actually, when I was in law school, that was when all of my things around music, DJing, and writing about music started taking off. So I can also empathize with the feeling of like I have this new and exciting thing that's happening that needs my attention, but I'm also like recognize that I've invested a lot of time and energy in this very rigorous academic area and feeling split between the two. So I'm curious, like how do you manage that, and what are some tips or some practices that you use for time management to ensure that you have time to give your artist career the attention it deserves, while also kind of seeing through the commitment you've made to medical school.
Yeah, and if I can remember, I will try to loop this conversation back into your previous question because I do think it is pertinent. From what I've talked about before, I think there's things that you can sacrifice or give up, and there's things that you can't. So, for example, I can give up video gaming. I enjoy playing video games, but that is more so a hobby than being an artist, right? And so it's very difficult for me to give up being an artist. It's almost, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it is up there in the priority list of things that I want to do with my life. So I think setting a very clear set of these are absolute musts and these are things I cannot give up no matter how busy I am or the things that I do, right? I mean, like even, like, going for a run, like, those are things that I don't think I could give up because a run takes, like, anywhere from, like, 30 minutes to an hour, 2 hours for me, and I can listen to podcasts, I can listen to, online lectures. That's actually what I did for basically the first 3 years of medical school was, I would just go to the gym, I would listen to my lectures for 2 hours at the gym, and it almost felt like I didn't waste a single minute because, I was just listening to lectures while I was at the gym. So, I think a couple things that I've learned over the years just being in medical school. And I'm actually towards the end of medical school now. So I've been through like literally the hardest parts of medical school while I was doing all this NFT stuff. So, I do know of kind of the rigorous demands that medical school has and how to juggle all of that. I would say the first thing is like being good at multitasking. I know people say it's impossible to multitask, but I think the thing is like again, it's like about understanding your priorities. You can't obviously multitask everything, right? You can multitask things that actually probably aren't as important, right? So for example, if I've already watched a lecture and then I want to rewatch it to see, the things that I missed, maybe, I don't need to stay as focused as when I watched that lecture for the first time. So I'll rewatch that lecture while I'm on the treadmill or while I'm going for a run, right? And when I'm running, it's difficult to run or work out without music, but it is possible, and I do my best to, like, tell myself, if I can mash these 2 things where I'm studying partially and working out, then, I'll make time to do something else, during that day, which could be art or something else, right? Spending time with, my partner, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that people don't realize, I think, and they probably don't realize it just because like it's difficult to conceptualize this unless you're actually the person, like actually the artist or whatever, like actually myself is art and medicine work on very different timelines. So what I mean by that is like take for example, you want to curate a show for a gallery or a museum. I mean, this can take months and very commonly can take years to plan out, right? If you want to complete a painting, I mean, artists can take anywhere between a day to a decade to complete a painting or even longer, right? So, you know, the timeline for being an artist is significantly stretched out compared to being a doctor. I think a doctor is, you have to go room to room and you have to see a patient in 15 minutes and then you go into the next room and you see the patient, or you go into a surgery, you hop out that surgery, you go into the next operating room, go to the next surgery, right? Whereas there's not this sense of immediacy in art. Actually, like when I'm working on projects, I can plan a project for a year in advance, right? Like some of the things that I'm dropping this year, have been in the works for a year, right? And so I allow myself that time and I'm given that time. And it's almost imperative that I do have that time to like, kind of like work on my own art, work on the marketing, work on the drops with the company or the entity that I'm dropping with, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and so these things are stretched out over a long time horizon versus the things in medicine, which is like you have to get these things done now. And so there's actually not too much conflict when it comes down to doing art and doing medicine. I think a lot of people ask me like how I have time to do both things, but in reality, if I can just allot myself a little bit of time, like every day or a little bit of time every week, I can actually get most of the stuff done for art while I'm doing stuff in medical school or while I'm doing stuff at the hospital. And the last thing I'd have to say is like I developed my style of art like long before medical school, right? And so I kind of knew what I was doing. And at the same time, while I wasn't on Twitter necessarily, like I had a lot of experience like on Instagram, like promoting things and like, I had, like, that foundation of, like, knowing how to interact and knowing what memes are and all of that, and so, just, like, coming into NFT Twitter, I didn't necessarily have to learn all of that from the ground up. So, when I started medical school, there was no conflicts in, "Oh, I need to spend all this time developing my art style." I mean, I had already, like, created art that I wanted to create and showcase, and so, this kind of goes back to talking about, like, the bull and bear market. I mean, during the bear market, I mean, you can take that time to really like develop the things that you want to work on when things are slow. And so when the time comes and things pick up and you have 10,000 things on your to-do list, at least you like improved or you completed the things that you wanted to um, during the bear market. So, you have more time to do other things.
Were there any points where you considered like quitting, dropping out, just being like, "Yo, like, I need to focus on the art. Like, I feel frustrated. I know that the road can be bumpy when it comes to navigating something like this."
I wouldn't say so actually. I think there's never been a time where I felt like I have to push myself into a corner and where I'm put in a corner and I have to pick between one or the other, right? I think medical school, once you start your clinical years and you actually start working the hospital, there's more responsibility because you're obviously like seeing patients and you actually have to do things, but you can actually work your schedule around a lot of things. And so like last month I had a vacation month basically. And so, I'm studying for a board exam. So there, most days, like 6, 7 hours I'm studying, like doing practice questions, but I still have time to like make it out to Manhattan, do these things, go to that Christie's auction where my art was featured, go spend time with my fiance, and go to all these museums and do art things and do medical things. Just because like there's a little bit more flexibility than people think there is.
Sure, sure. I think we touched on this a little earlier too, but I'd love to dive into mental health as well because, um, you know, there are obviously a lot of stresses and pressures of being an artist in, a space as volatile and fast moving as NFTs and Web3. There's obviously the stresses and pressures of being in medical school and compounding all of these things together. I'm just curious, like, how do you stay grounded and amidst like all of these different things that you know occupy your attention and can also be a bit of an emotional ride.
The one thing that grounds me more than anything, besides like my family and, besides, the very important people in my life, the one thing that grounds me the most actually is listening to music. I'm like a very big music person. I do my best to like explore as many genres as possible. I think I was thinking about this yesterday, actually, funny enough. I was like so sad that I might not have enough years in my life to explore all the music that I would like to the point where like I'm very comfortable with, all these, musicians and genres and et cetera, et cetera. But like if I'm creating a particular illustration, then like I'll have some songs that I listen to. And sometimes like, when I'm illustrating something that reminds me of like, for example, like my drive home from work or something, then I'll be listening to just the stuff that I listen to, when I'm driving home from work, and that kind of puts me in the mood to convey exactly what it is I want to show. Because like in that example, like if I'm driving home from work and I see a sunset and it's like, I don't know, like rows of trees or something, then whatever like I would probably listen to during that drive home, I'd like to play that while I'm illustrating to really like fully immerse myself into, whatever it is, right? For example, I am gonna take probably the biggest board exam of my life in like next week or in a week and a half.
Good luck.
Thanks, man. Like before every exam, like I will like listen to music, whatever like I'm feeling for that morning. Like I will do my best. Before I like went into like surgeries in the operating room, if it was something that where I was like, oh, this is gonna be like really complex, or something where I would have to be in there for a long time, I'll try to listen to something that would ease my mind. Like all these different things. I think what grounds me the most actually is listening to music.
I love that. Obviously, I was in music and media before really coming into Web3 and NFTs. Would love to hear a bit about like what are you listening to? Like what do you listen to when you're doing your creative process? Like what's the music that you're listening to now? I'd love to get a sense of your taste.
I don't even know if this is a real term, but I tell my fiance that I'm a sample junkie. Like I love listening to like the music that like essentially like birthed hip hop, right?
Hmm.
Like I mean like the birth of hip hop, Bronx, coming from basically like sampling old funk, old soul, old jazz music, right? And kind of mashing them together and overlaying beats on top of it. But I really enjoy like the like Roy Ayers, Cool and the Gang, all of the jazz, soul, funk, blues music from that era. I think like I have like so many playlists of like different vibes that and different emotions that I feel that like I think the music would fit to.
There it is. I love that. I love that. So when we think about like your artist career, like obviously some big milestones, the major auction sales, the Sotheby's, the Christie's, all that. What do you like consider to be on like your bucket list? Like what are some things you want to achieve in the future?
I think the next thing that I'm looking towards is probably a show. Either a solo or a group exhibition probably would be something that I'm looking forward to. I'm working on a body of work right now that I would like to showcase at some point, hopefully within the next year. I guess we'll just have to see how it pans out. But it's been really difficult to kind of grasp my head around like what it means to be an artist in the NFT space and the overarching art space because we're like a self-sufficient, sustainable community here, right? I mean, no Christie's, no Sotheby's, no galleries. Like we have been, kind of self-sufficient. Like the NFTs that are being purchased for the most part are from crypto native, sources, right? Like most of the people buying NFTs have been in, crypto and Web3, and they're selling to people who are in crypto and Web3. And so, we're slowly branching out to different sectors and different, areas of the world, and trying to onboard as many people as possible while we're doing that. But finding an identity as an artist has been more challenging than I thought it would be. And I say that because it's easier to find an identity on the internet as an internet persona creating NFTs. But now that I'm doing my best to try to break out into a different space, it's essentially starting from the ground up. I mean, sure, my art might have a higher price tag, but that doesn't really mean very much, personally speaking, compared to gaining those experiences working with galleries or working with museums and working with a different side of art that a lot of us just haven't seen, and haven't gone through. And so I think it's going to be challenging, but also really exciting. And so my next big goal really is just to try to grow a career in art from the ground up. Basically, that's about it.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that's interesting too is I know you've tried a number of different formats. You were pretty early to try out open editions. You've done obviously the one of ones. You've done some interesting collaborations with other artists. Like, how do you kind of think about where you are in your stage of your career and like the dynamics between like supply size and demand and things like that in this sort of like market context where you're also kind of bridging the gap between the NFT space and now the traditional art world as well.
I think maybe in 30, 40 years, 50 years, if NFTs are still a thing, if crypto is still a thing, should I say, I think it'll be a lot easier to see the bigger picture then. But I think for the immediate future, it's going to be difficult to see how NFTs resonate with collectors and artists and museums and galleries from the traditional art world. I think we're getting there, but a lot of the times I feel like it's still a very small subset of people who are getting this concept of NFTs. And it's going to be strange to see how we balance supply and demand in relation to, like, does a traditional art market care about NFTs or not at the moment, right? I mean, I'm pretty confident that they will care in 40, 50 years, right? I think there won't be like a differentiation between NFTs and traditional art and digital art. It's like it's just all going to be art, and people are going to be like not think twice about purchasing an NFT at that moment. But I think, while, kind of we're seeing generational shifts in, just like, the baby boomers are getting, kind of older, and the millennials are getting older, and you know kind of adoption of emerging technologies is changing. I think all of this at the moment is kind of like a gray area for NFTs and adoption, and kind of understanding of what it means to own a digital asset. And so when I think about supply and demand, I think, like, in terms of NFTs, I've done a lot, to say the least, right? But I think it's important to just kind of like learn from others. And I hate to say it like this because it's like almost me saying like I'm watching other people fail, and maybe not fail, but right, I'm watching other people and learning from them, right? So someone makes a mistake and does something that might not be seen in the best light in the Web3 space, then I know not to do that. Or someone does something really good, and it's like, oh, okay, like this actually like really paid off for itself, and this like marked a high point for this artist's career, then that's probably something that I would like to do. And so it's really just like learning from other artists and learning from collectors, and just like gauging opinions and kind of online sentiment.
Great points. And it will be really interesting to see how this all evolves, and the timeline there with the traditional art world. And Yeah, look, one thing I'm also curious too, man, is like how are you thinking about life after med school? Like, are you thinking to continue to kind of like juggle the two worlds and continue on the career path to being a doctor while also doing art, or how are you thinking about that?
I think my like vision in life is like I'm gonna max out on everything until like I can't, right? So like I'm like going for a run, like I will go until like my knees or my ankles give in, and then I'll stop because like it's probably gonna damage my body. Or like, um, you know, whatever it is, it's like 110%. So unless there is a very specific reason for why I can't do both art and medicine, then like there's no reason to stop doing both, right? And so, I mean, obviously there's going to be favorable situations. For example, the way the residency system is set up in America, basically you apply to residency as a medical student, you get the interviews, right? Some residency programs will want to interview medical students. And then you start ranking kind of the interviews that you did. And so like it's like, oh, I want to go to this school, this school, this school, this school in kind of a first, second, third, fourth, etc. order. And then the residencies will match their interviewees, right? This is a person I want, and then this person, and this person. And then on match day, which is sometime in March, some algorithm like puts together everyone's matches, and then it will match the applicant to the residency program. So you basically kind of have a choice, but you also don't have a choice. But I would prefer to go to kind of a large, um, art kind of hub, right? So whether that's on the East Coast or the West Coast, I'd like to go somewhere where there's a very rich kind of art scene. I think there's a lot to explore between art and medicine as well. And the more I develop my career as an artist, I think I'll have a much more legitimate voice in art, whether that's like quite literally like hospital-based art curation or art therapy, or any of that. And then of course on the flip side, I think, being a doctor, like forces you to think like in situations that are so critical to the point where it could dictate someone's life, or someone's death, right? And so having like critical thinking abilities and being an academic for like basically forever, I think opens myself up to just learning about things, and being open to things in art that I might not be open to if I wasn't so invested in academia.
Yeah, I love that, and I love what your thoughts on art therapy and bridging those two worlds together. That's really cool, man. Well, look, great conversation. We've got one more segment, our rapid fire one, bullish or bearish. Let's start. Bullish or bearish open editions.
Bearish.
Why is that?
So this is a very nuanced question. It's almost like a loaded question. So I think open edition versus not open edition. So open editions, I think, work very well for artists who are just still coming up and who haven't reached kind of a higher tier of artists. I don't want to say higher tier because that suggests that there's like lower tier artists. But what I mean is like
Their
artists who
career
don't have a
development. Yeah.
yeah, career development, like
Hmm.
artists that don't have a higher price point, right?
Hmm.
Because I think when you do an open edition, while you're still like kind of like still able to make one of one sales, they might not be kind of double digits yet, and or they could be like low double digit ETH sales, right? I think that like when you do an open edition, kind of around that area, it really kind of is the sweet spot because it allows you to explore your collector base and gives you a good gauge of who is interested in your art, right? And if you do it before where your art is not selling as well, or maybe the prices that you're getting aren't as high as you would like for your one of ones, I think it's much more important to just like put as much one of ones out there, right? I think it's important to grow that collector base with people who own very unique pieces from you, just because like at that point then you can build a pretty big repertoire of things that you want to showcase, and share your image, share your vision. I think a lot of the times, when I look at artists who, especially like artist portfolios from artists who reach out to me and ask me questions, I think a lot of the times I prefer, like, especially from like a collective perspective, I like to see artists with a lot of art, even if it's like a lot of one of ones that sold for very low prices. I think when I see more art, it like gives me a better understanding of where your vision is and what you're trying to convey with your artwork. So maybe an open edition when you're just starting out is probably not the best idea. And then of course at the upper end of artists, or I guess artists who are selling for very high price points, I mean, at that point, I think it is cool to do an open edition, but then you have to juggle kind of the negative sentiment behind, everything that comes with dropping like 10,000 editions. And, that's just everyone kind of understands the pros and cons of that. So
Bullish or bearish AI art.
bullish. So when I think about AI art right now, it's almost like thinking about how people look at NFTs in the public eye, right? It's like NFTs are not art. NFTs are a scam. NFTs like this and that. It's too easy to make money off of NFTs. NFTs are a scam, right? I think I hear a lot of conversations about that, about AI art. It's like you just put this in in Midjourney or in Dolly, and you came out with a trillion images. Like you're not an artist. I think those things will just kind of like smoothen themselves out. I think that's just a very reactionary thing to emerging technologies. So that's not a big deal in my mind. I think really like AI art creates so much art so fast that if you're able to curate from a very, very, very wide range of art and you can properly curate from that, then you can create probably some of the most compelling projects. Just like personally speaking, I think like people who are able to take a very wide array of outputs and then like curate them into a series have some of the most like compelling series on OpenSea that I see. I think I can't remember her name, but she recently dropped with Bright Moments. She had a AI series, like last month, and
Mhm.
it was like a bunch of portraits of like people in Japan, and it was like
Was it Emi
one.
Kusano?
I think so, yeah. And,
Yeah.
and it was like one of the coolest. Like I bought one of those. Like the moment I saw it, I like bought it, and then I looked at
Neural
the full
Fad, I think.
series.
Yeah.
Yeah, Neurofad,
Yeah.
and
Super
and then I
cool. I was
looked
out
at
there
it.
in Tokyo, and that was like the talk of
Oh,
the of
cool.
the of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was like, this is amazing. And then like life in West America, is that what it's called? Well, life in
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. It's Rupe
all time.
Renisto. Life
Yeah,
in
yeah,
West
there you go.
America. There it
Life in
is.
West America, yeah. Life in West America is probably one of my favorite like series in Web3, just period. I think it just like creates such vivid emotional compositions, um, and like every time I look at it, I don't think like that is worth any less because it's an AI generated piece of art, right? It still takes a very good visionary to curate a collection in a series. And I mean, like the tools are there, but still the artist has to create the outputs and curate them and mint them. And so yeah, I'm bullish on AI art.
Great. No, likewise, likewise. Let's see. Bullish or bearish PFP projects?
Very bearish. I think the best PFP in my mind is Punks, and it's not even comparable. There's really nothing else I have to say about that. I think, it's always going to be, is this going to flip Punks? Is this going to be the next Punks? Is this going to be better than Punks? Is this going to be more historically relevant than Punks? And to this point, I mean, the conversation has been, it's not, right? And like most of last year and the year before was driven entirely by this euphoria behind what is the next PFP that we're buying, right? And even then, after like a million different projects have dropped, it still comes down to Punks being basically at the top of the market cap and top of the floors, and I think that speaks for itself, right? I mean, there's just a lot of history behind it that I don't need to talk about. So yeah, I'm pretty bearish except for Punks, which I'm very bullish on.
I hear you. I hear you. Final question for bullish or bearish. Bullish or bearish on meme coins?
Pretty bearish, very similar to what I talked about when I talk about like illustrating for memes and curating memes. I think memes come and go. So bullish if you can catch the meme coin like in its infancy and have the awareness that it's gonna be a big enough meme that's gonna like pump your bags pretty high. Very rarely anyone ever has that amount of intuition, and it's almost just luck. So
Well, Grant, such a pleasure chatting with you, man. Oh, best of luck on the exams and all of the next steps, and look forward to catching up with you next time you're in the city.
yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. I will definitely try to come down to New York City at some point.
Well, we'll be pulling for those East Coast art towns and art cities for the residency. Um, awesome, man. Thanks again, and keep up the great work. Love that conversation. I think there's a lot of valuable insights to take away from it. From his thoughts on building a collector base, to the power of memes in the NFT space, to managing your time and staying grounded while trying to achieve big things in multiple fields concurrently, especially in this wild world of Web3. I think it's super impressive what Grant has accomplished, and I'm excited to see what's next for him. If you enjoyed this conversation, would love for you to dive a little deeper into what we're building at NFT Now with the Now Network, the foundation for all of our efforts to build the future of tokenized media. You can learn more about the Now Pass, which is the access pass to the Now Network, at nowpass.xyz. And you can jump in our Discord to get in touch with the community at discord.gg/NFTnow. Hope to see you there. And we will see you next time on the NFT Now podcast.